I'm Cindy Selfe, and my work is in digital media and composition. I work here at Ohio State University, where I am Distinguished Humanities Professor in the Department of English. I think that any definition is going to be more or less adequate to the task at hand. But for my purposes, when I teach multimodal composition, I'm trying to get students or people who write or compose to think about making meaning in different channels, using audio or oral channels of communication, moving image or video channels of communication like animation, still image or photography, alphabetic. All these are modes of expression, modes of making meaning. And I think when Aristotle says we should use all available means to make meaning, to communicate, to persuade, when I think of that quote, I think of all available modalities of expression can and sometimes do come into play when we're trying to make meaning in a given rhetorical context. I think if students are going to operate in a 21st century world where communications have to cross cultural boundaries, geopolitical boundaries, linguistic boundaries, I think if a student is operating in those environments, they're going to have to make meaning in a number of different semiotic channels in order to make themselves understood. So I can't imagine how a student who's going to communicate in those larger contexts with networks that are worldwide, I can't imagine how they're going to be successful in making meaning unless they have all available modes of expression there and ready to use. Now, they might not use every modality for every message, but unless we teach them how to access and use these different modalities for communication, how are they ever going to know? How are they going to be able to choose from those modalities given the right rhetorical context, the right purpose, the right audience, the right genre? So I think it is incumbent on us, if we're teachers who are going to prepare students for that kind of world, I think we better teach them different ways of making meaning, and then teach them how to make the choices from among different modalities according to the affordances and according to the rhetorical context that they're operating within. And then I think students will have the tools necessary to accomplish their task of communication. Well, I think professors in other disciplines should also think about multimodality, because they're educating young people to operate in the same global contexts. And in those global contexts, if you have a lecture class in medicine, for example, that enrolls 500 students, 250 of whom might be speakers of English as a second, third, or fourth language, and you're not using different modes of expression to get across an idea, and you're not teaching them how to use different modes of expression to get across ideas, how are you going to be sure that your instruction gets across, and how are you going to make sure that they can get meaning across to a patient? So for me, it's a matter of providing students all the tools they need to make meaning, and then teaching them how to choose from among those tools to make meaning effectively. I think they have to forget the habits of mind that many of us have taught them. And the habit of mind I'm talking about is the privileging of alphabetic text, as Patricia Dunn says, not as one way of making meaning, but as the way of making meaning, or the sine qua non of educated people. I don't believe it is. I think it's one marker of an educated person, but I think there are other markers of educated people. I know, for instance, a number of musicians who are great musicians, who know so much more than I do about anything in the musical realm, and I don't know their language, I don't know their ways of making meaning, so I'm ignorant in those. I would think that I need to learn their ways of making meaning if I want to match their literacy abilities too. So for me, it's just a matter of putting as many tools in a person's tool belt as possible so that they can use them when the right time comes, in the right circumstances, and that's a matter of rhetorical understanding of context. Well, we have to forget what we know and what we've invested our time into. Most of us were brought up, or at least my generation, most of us were brought up as print babies, print students. So, when I want to make meaning, the first thing I turn to is print. And I can do print pretty well. It's my first language, right? I mean, I can write an article like in the snap of a finger because I've done it so many times. I'm so familiar with the genre and with alphabetic ways of making meaning. When I realized that meaning can be made on a number of different channels, I really have to think about making meaning in using different modalities of expression. It takes me some concentration. I speak those modalities as a second or third or fourth language. And so I'm not quite as fluent in video or audio as I am in print. But I realize that when I combine those modes, I can accomplish things that I could not accomplish with print alone. And my texts are different, and they can accomplish different things, and they can function in different rhetorical contexts effectively. So that to me is the biggest challenge. When I forget the habit of mind that tells me that print is the only way or the best way. To me, that's not a rhetorical decision. I have to make that rhetorical. I have to ask myself, what is this rhetorical context, and what ways or modes of expression will work best here, and why? And then I have to combine modes if I'm going to meet the challenges of that rhetorical experience or context. Yeah, the challenges for programs, I think, are a bit different. Programs, first of all, have to have equipment, and they have to have space. And that equipment goes out of date, and it gets broken by students, and the spaces have to be specially crafted so that the kinds of composition that takes place with video or audio can be accomplished. And so schools have to understand that composition programs aren't your grandmother's composition program anymore, right? I mean, if you're going to run a composition program that teaches audio and video composing, you're going to have to provide small studio spaces. You're going to have to provide cameras and audio recording equipment. You're going to have to provide editing programs and computers for a program that has traditionally been seen as a non-technological program. So it takes a lot of education on behalf of the WPA, the writing program administrator, who has to educate the department and on up the ladder in a university. And it takes a far-sighted university to realize that we're not educating students to be citizens who can only make meaning through print. We're educating people to make meaning in a very complex, globalized environment that requires multiple modalities. So I would say space, equipment, and software are three huge challenges for programs who want to undertake the teaching of multimodal composition. But they're not the biggest challenges. The biggest challenges is the biggest challenge is finding a person who can lead you forward in that toward that goal or purpose of integrating multimodal composing into your program without losing sight of the goals of teaching rhetorical composing at the same time. Because if you start privileging technology over the rhetorical composing part of a program, I think you lose out too. So you have to find a person who will help you teach with technology in the context of a rhetorical composing program. When teachers think that multimodal work is dumbed down work, sometimes they need to, you need to show them a good piece of multimodal work and reverse engineer it for them so that they can see what is involved at every stage of the game, how richly textured and layered and focused and elaborated that piece of multimodal work is, and before they can appreciate it. When we do that, and I have done that when I've gone out to different places to speak, they're taken aback. Then they start realizing what they've been thinking all along may not have been the case. Just like anything, if you don't know what goes into a craft, you're not going to appreciate it. So I think we need to take our time and show colleagues excellent examples of multimodal composing and then reverse engineer those pieces of composing to show what goes into them and why they're equally as intellectually challenging as printed works.